Assalamu alaikum. Today we'll be discussing ethnicity as a factor to explain differences in educational attainment. Now, before we start off with ethnicity, I'd like to remind you all that we've already done intelligence, we've already done social class, and today while discussing ethnicity or the role of ethnicity while explaining differences in educational attainment, I'd like to broadly put this into three main headings, three main categories. Number one, we'd speak about racism that is experienced within schools. Number two, cultural explanations. And number three, ethnicity, subcultures, and attainment. So, our lesson for today is about the extent to which racism within schools affects the educational attainment of pupils. Before we proceed, I'd like to remind everyone UK is a multicultural country. Individuals from different ethnicities live in the UK. And when we speak about ethnic minorities, typically the idea that we all typically hold is that members of ethnic minorities usually do not do well. However, I'd like to clarify that we have certain ethnic minority members, for instance, individuals from the Chinese origin, or for the matter of fact, individuals from the Indian origin, they end up doing even better than the locals. However, unfortunately, individuals from the Pakistani origin and Bangladeshi origin, they do worst. Now, before we proceed with racism in schools or the extent to which racism within schools affects education attainment of pupils, I'd like everyone to note down that there are five different theorists that we'd be discussing here. Number one, we'd speak about the study that was conducted by Gilborn and Udall in the early 2000s. Number two, we'd talk about the study that was conducted by Tony Seville in 1997. Number three, number three, we'd speak about the study that was conducted by Heidi Safia Mirza. This again is in the early 1990s. Number four, we'd speak about the study that was conducted by Connolly in the late 1990s. And towards the end, we discussed the study that was conducted by Farzana Shane in 2010. Now, to begin with, as we speak about differences in educational attainment based on ethnic differences. The study that was conducted by Gilborn and Udall in the early 2000s, according to Gilborn and Udall, marketization forces. Let me remind you all of the neoliberal perspective that we've done before. According to the neoliberal perspective, today, because of marketization forces being introduced, today because there being competition, this competition leading to league tables being published. Schools today or colleges today, they look forward towards attainment. They look forward towards having students that could actually help that particular school have a better position in the league tables. Now, for the ones who do not remember what league tables are, these league tables are published in the UK, and through these league tables, apparently parents get information on the extent to which a particular school does well. In a nutshell, when I talk about a league table, when I use the term league table, I'm actually referring to the results of a school being published. Now, because of these league tables, because of because of attainment or education performance being the major priority, being the major preference that many schools hold, due to which today, according to Gilborn and Udall in the study in early 2000s, there's a lot of racism that is experienced by students within schools. According to Gilborn and Udall, many individuals from the working class origin and individuals from the Black Caribbean origin, they end up being systematically neglected. Now, what does it mean when we talk about them being systematically neglected? The idea that I'd want everyone to have over here is, see, if you remember, before this, we had done group abilities, we had spoken about sets, we had spoken about streaming, we had spoken about banding, we had spoken about mixed ability groups. According to Gilborn and Udall again, individuals from the Afro-Caribbean origin, they are to be found mostly in the lower sets. Now, students of a particular ethnic minority or students of a particular social group, if they hold disproportionate amount of if they're disproportionately being put into the lower sets, that eventually would mean that these kids would not be doing well. And the general impression that teachers and everyone around has about Black pupils is that they'd be rowdy, they'd be loud, they'd be involved into behavior which schools typically do not approve of. So this misconception, or rather say this idea that is generally, or this stereotypical view that is generally held about Black pupils, eventually leads to the image that teachers hold about these students being very negative. Eventually, this leads to these young Black pupils being disadvantaged. Eventually, this leads to the teachers being more strict towards these Black pupils. This eventually leads to teachers being more concerned about disciplinary issues. And now, do you know what? If a teacher focuses more on disciplinary issues, this would eventually mean that the time that particular teacher would have spent on academics is now being spent dealing with disciplinary concerns. According to Gilbon and Udall, through their research, teachers had an expectation that Black students will generally present disciplinary problems, and they therefore tended to feel that control and punishment had to be given higher priority than academic concerns. Like I just said, if teachers start prioritizing disciplinary concerns over academic concerns, this would eventually lead to that particular group of students not performing well. Now, most Black students felt they were disadvantaged by their treatment in schools. Remember, my dear, we're discussing this under the heading racisms within schools. How is it that racism within school eventually ends up affecting the educational performance of ethnic minority pupils? In this case, we are specifically referring to Black pupils over here. By and large, they expected to be blamed for disciplinary problems. They also expected teachers to underestimate their future achievement. Now, teachers underestimating the future achievement of a particular group. Of course, if I may remind you of the self-fulfilling prophecy, if teachers are not really expecting good from a particular social group, the likelihood of that particular social group not performing well is always there, according to the self-fulfilling prophecy, at least. So in a nutshell, we talk about the study that was conducted by Gilbon and Udall in the early 2000s. According to Gilbon and Udall, individuals from Afro-Caribbean origin, individuals, Black pupils, they end up facing a lot of racism within schools. Teachers teachers often unintentionally teachers often unintentionally end up blaming these students for disciplinary concerns which they feel that they targeted at, which results in them not performing well. So Gilbon and Udall see teachers perceptions of behavior towards Black Caribbean students as racist. However, most teachers are unaware. Now this is pretty important to understand. Most teachers are found to be unaware of this fact. Many teachers are passionately committed to challenging the very inequalities that they participate in reinforcing. Now, apparently, according to Gilbon and Udall, these teachers deep down inside, they are trying to they're trying to get over racism. They're trying to not be racist, but in many cases, without even realizing, they end up being racist towards these Black pupils, which eventually leads to a very negative experience that these Black pupils have towards schools and specific and education in general. Now, their racism takes the form of institutional racism. Now, what does the word institutional racism over here mean? When a particular organization is seen to be or found to be racist, जब कोई इदारा आपको लगे कि आपके साथ racist हो रहा है. Now, we spoke about the study that was conducted by Gilbon and Udall under the heading Racism Within Schools. Now, taking this ahead, if we speak about teachers' perceptions of ethnicity, what sort of perception do teachers hold about about individuals from different ethnic origins? Now, continuing with the study by Gilbon and Udall, based on the study conducted by Gilbon and Udall, under the heading of टीचर अंडर द हेडिंग दैट टीचर्स परसेप्शन ऑफ एथनिसिटी, टीचर्स का क्या परसेप्शन है अलग अलग एथनिक माइनॉरिटी के इंडिविजुअल्स के बारे में. व्हाट सॉर्ट ऑफ परसेप्शन डू टीचर्स होल्ड for individuals belonging to different ethnic origins. Over here, my dear, we talk about Black Caribbean boys. We talk about what Gilbon and Udall thought of this. We'd move on and talk about Saville. We'd move on next in line. We'd speak about Black Caribbean girls. Remember, initially we'd speak about Black Caribbean boys, and then we'd speak about Black Caribbean girls, followed by the perception that teachers hold about members from South Asian origins. Let me just highlight this for you. South Asian origins. This study, my dear, was conducted by Connolly, right? And moving ahead in continuity to this, we'd speak about Asian heritage girls. The study was conducted by Farzana Shane. Now, getting started with the teacher's perception of ethnicity. To begin with, Udall again, Gilbon and Udall again. According to Gilbon and Udall, they found that teachers tended to see Black Caribbean boys, whatever their social class may be, as less able and more disruptive as compared to white boys. Teachers' perception. What do teachers think about Black Caribbean boys? According to Gilbon and Udall, teachers saw them to be less able. Teachers saw them to be more disruptive. They were more likely to place Black boys in lower sets, like we discussed earlier, and give priority over their control and punishment, right? So, according to Gilbon and Udall, again, it is the negative perception that teachers hold about these Black pupils, what probably translates into them being racist without even them being aware, without even them intentionally doing it. In line with this, we'd move on and we'd have a look at what Tony Seville has to say about this in 1997. Let me introduce you all to Tony Seville. He is an individual from the Black origin himself. This gentleman is a British educational consultant. He chairs the Commission on Race and Ethnic Disparities, tasked with looking into race disparity in the UK. Having a look at what Mr. Seville found out through his research that he conducted in 1997. Now, Tony Seville, a Black Caribbean researcher, studied the boys of 11 to 16-year-olds school in Britain and found that Black Caribbean boys were singled out for punishment. Now, what does it mean when he says Black Caribbean boys were singled out for punishment? Now, to be able to help you understand this, let me give you an example. What this gentleman did was he compared the the school composition. He compared school composition, and then he compared the percentage of students that were being expelled, right? School composition versus the percentage of students who were being expelled. In a simpler manner, एक स्कूल के अंदर कितने परसेंट एथनिक माइनॉरिटी ब्लैक करेबियन ओरिजिन, एक्चुअली एक स्कूल के अंदर कितने परसेंट आपके पास ब्लैक करेबियन ओरिजिन के इंडिविजुअल्स हैं as compared to the percentage of black pupils who expel from school, who get expelled from school. Now, according to Civil, teachers tend to single out black pupils when it comes to punishment. According to Civil, again, we have, for example, they made 32% of the student population. Now, this is school composition. According to Civil, through the research that he conducted in 1997, 32% of students belonged to an Afro-Caribbean or Black Caribbean origin in the school that he conducted his research on. However, if we speak in terms of the percentage of students who were expelled, this was 85%. It's pretty simple. If there are 32% students from a particular social group, a particular ethnic origin, the amount of students that would get expelled, it should pretty much be in line. So if there are 32% of Black Caribbean boys, there should have been around 30 to 32% or 30 to something ranging between 30 to 40% of students would be expelled. However, according to Civil, what he found out was even when these black pupils, they made up 32% of the total student population, if we have a look at the students who were excluded from school, 85% of them were black. Don't you think this turns out to be pretty disproportionate? Of course it does. So according to Civil, teachers tended to single out Black pupils for punishment. And one more thing, additionally, according to Civil again, teachers tended to lump up all Black boys together. Or in other words, if we talk about Black pupils, of course, if some would be assuming, some would be actually disruptive, others wouldn't. So lumping up all together, or uh, assuming that they're all disruptive, isn't really very fair on them again. So according to Tony Sebel, teachers lumped up all Black Caribbean boys together, and Tony Seville, what he did was he divided. Now, according to Seville, through this research that was conducted in 1997 on a school that had 11 to 16-year-old boys in that particular school, what he found out was that there were three different groups. He categorized teachers into three particular groups based on the relationships those teachers had with Black pupils. Now, what Civil is doing is he's dividing teachers into three different groups based on how or what sort of relationship that they held with the Black pupils. There were three categories that he named, that he came up with. To begin with, number one, supportive teachers. As the name explains, supportive teachers, the teachers who'd support, guide, encourage Black pupils. And of course, for all the obvious reasons, they'd have very good relationships and rapport with the Black pupils. However, according to Civil, again, they weren't much. They just made 10% of the total staff. So 10% of staff according to Civil, only 10% of staff was supportive towards Black pupils and enjoyed a good relationship with Black pupils. Number two, irritated teachers. Now, these irritated teachers, they made up around 60% of the staff, which is quite a majority. According to Civil again, these teachers, they did not wish Black pupils ill. They did not wish Black pupils ill. However, they felt like disciplinary concerns should be prioritized over anything else, including academics. So these irritated teachers that made up around 60% of the staff, according to Tony Seville, these irritated teachers, they were supportive, but felt that firmer discipline was needed. So again, even these majority of the teachers, according to Tony Seville, they blamed the boys street culture for many of the school problems, the Black boys street culture for many of the school problems, and they felt like discipline should be given a priority. So let me remind you, Tony Seville, through his research that was conducted in 1997, tried dividing teachers into different categories based on the relationship they held with Black pupils. Number one, we spoke about supportive teachers, but they only made 10%. Number two, we spoke about irritated teachers. They made up around 60% of the staff. However, the third category that we have over here are antagonistic teachers that made up around 30% of the staff. Now, these antagonistic teachers, according to Civil, they were openly racist. They were openly racist, and they very openly objected Black Caribbean street culture. They very openly objected Black Caribbean street culture. Now, we just spoke about teachers' perception about different ethnicities. The study that was conducted by Tony Seville in the year 1997, according to Tony Seville, teachers singled out Black Caribbean pupils. According to Tony Seville, teachers lumped all Black pupils together when it came to the perception that they held about them, which was usually them being disruptive. Number three, the third thing that I'd want you all to keep in mind regarding Tony Seville is Tony Seville, he divided teachers into three main groups based on the relationship that these teachers had with Black pupils or Black Caribbean students. To name these three groups, number one, we spoke about supportive teachers. Number two, we spoke about irritated teachers. Number three, we spoke about antagonistic teachers. Supportive teachers were supportive, as the name explains. However, they just made up 10% of the teachers' population. Irritated teachers, they wished uh, well. They wished these Black pupils well and not ill. However, even they felt discipline should be a major priority or a concern, and they made up 60% of the population. I think I just mentioned that earlier as well. And number three, the third category over here, antagonistic teachers. These antagonistic teachers, according to Tony Sewell, they made around 30% of the population. They very openly, very overtly objected Black street culture. And these teachers, they were overtly racist as well. Now, we just got over discussing teachers' perception about Black Caribbean boys. Moving on, we'd speak about another researcher over here. This research that was conducted by Heidi Safia Mirza, and she's the lady we're talking about. Now, Heidi Safia Mirza, she conducted research in the early 1990s, specifically 1992. She conducted a research on Black Caribbean girls. And according to just like what Seville did when he categorized teachers into three different groups. Safia Mirza, she categorized teachers into five different groups based on the relationship these teachers had with Black Caribbean girls, right? We've spoken about boys. Now we're moving on and we're discussing the relationship or the different types of categories through which we could explain how teachers had a relationship with Black Caribbean girls. To begin with, there are five categories, okay? To begin with, we speak about overtly racist teachers, as the name explains. They were a small minority and girls avoided any sort of interaction with these teachers for obvious reasons. Number two, the Christians. Now, Mirza refers to these teachers trying to be colorblind, or these teachers felt that there wasn't much of racism, or racism wasn't really a problem that many Black girls were experiencing. They sometimes expected too little from these girls as well. You know, when you're not expecting a lot from your student, you're you're in a subtle manner discouraging that student or that particular group of students from performing well. So these Christians, two things to remember about them. Number one, they refuse to see racism being a problem. Number two, teachers expecting very little, too little from them. Number three, the third category of teachers over here, according to Mirza, are the Crusaders. They were anti-racist and they were probably good at heart as well. However, these teachers, even when, like I said, they were probably good at heart as well, even when these teachers, they tried their level best, probably to the best of their capacity, to make their lessons relevant to Black students, just because they were not Black themselves. The teachers, we're talking about the teachers, right? We're referring to this particular group as the Crusaders. According to Mirza, these Crusaders, they were anti-racist. These Crusaders, they were anti-racist. One. Number two, these Crusaders, they tried making their lessons relevant to Black pupils as well. But just because they were not Black themselves, they ended up, the lessons ended up getting pretty confusing and irrelevant for Black Caribbean girls. So teachers that were good at heart, they were probably trying it too, but it didn't really work out the way they wanted it to work out. So we've spoken about three categories over here, three categories out of five that were put forward by Heidi Safia Mirza through her research, where she tried categorizing or typifying teachers or putting teachers into different groups based on the relationships they held with Black Caribbean girls. The fourth group that we have over here in line are the liberal chauvinists. These liberal chauvinists, like the Crusaders, again, good at heart, they meant well for the students, but they tended to underestimate their students' ability. And like I mentioned a minute earlier, if teachers start underestimating their students' ability, this might, again, through the principles of self-fulfilling prophecy, this might eventually translate into the performance of the students as well. The fifth category, the Black teachers here. According to Mirza, these Black teachers, they made a small group. They were the favorites. They did not show any sort of favoritism. Again, they were liked, they were respected, and they gave help, they helped, they gave advices. They were extremely valued by these black girls. So to sum it up, we just spoke about five different categories that were put forward by Heidi Safia Mirza in early 1990s. She came up with these different categories based on research where she studied two secondary schools in London. Her research focused on 62 young Black students with the age range of 15 to 19 years. So let me remind you at the beginning, what I said was we discussed five different theorists over here. We started off with Gilman and Udall, and they conducted the research in the early 2000s. Number two, we spoke about Tony Sewell. Sewell conducted this research in 1997. Number three, we just spoke about Heidi Safia Mirza, or also known as Mirza. She conducted a research in 1992. Three down, two more to go. Number four, we speak about this study. We discussed this study that was conducted by Connolly. Connolly conducted a research in 1998. Remember, my dear, we're discussing all of this under the heading of the perception teachers hold about members of different ethnic minority, or the perception teachers hold about students from different ethnic origin. We spoke about Black boys, we spoke about Black girls. Now we speak about the perception teachers held about South Asians. Now, through this research that was conducted by Connolly in the year 1998, on a school, a British multi-ethnic inner city primary school. She focused on the relationship between South Asian students and the teachers, and the age bracket these kids belonged to was 5 to 6 years, pretty young kids. The children were seen as obedient, hardworking, and conformist. Teachers expected them to produce high quality work. Again, the teacher's perception over here is pretty positive. If teachers find a particular group of students being obedient, if teachers find a particular group of students being hardworking and conformist and being expecting a lot from them, this might as well translate into better performance by that particular social group as well. So girls, now we talk about South Asian girls, okay? Girls were seen as models of good behavior. When the boys did misbehave, instead of being referred to as rowdy and disruptive, teachers simply refer to them as silly. Again, we cannot really directly compare these students with the research that was conducted by Mirza, or for the matter of fact, Sewell, because there's a difference in terms of age bracket. Nonetheless, we are discussing teachers' perception. Silly rather than as a challenge to the teacher's authority. As a result, they were not punished as much as Black Caribbean boys. Boys were often praised for good work, while girls tended to be left alone. Again, the general perception held about Asian girls is that they'd marry young and probably not have a profession, probably. So, taking this ahead, we spoke about the study that was conducted by Connolly in the year 1998. To sum it up, according to Connolly, teachers held a positive image. They held a positive perception about these South Asian kids. In line with this, we'd move on and discuss the study that was conducted by Farzana Shane, again on Asian heritage girls. However, yeah, before we move on, this young lady, Farzana Shane, she is from here. She has also taught A-level sociology, just in case you find that interesting. So, girl gangs. In a research on schools in England, Shane in 2010 termed one group of Asian heritage girls as the girl gang, right? Now, Shane referred to one particular group of Asian girls as the girl gang. Let's have a look at what they did that made them being labeled as a gang. Teachers saw these girl gangs as troublemakers. They objected to assertive girls in gangs partly because this challenged their stereotypical perception of Asian passive femininity. Now, you know what? The perception that is generally held about Asian girls is them being soft spoken, timid, them being passive, and yeah, them being passive. So if these, because these young girls, they were seen to be challenging that stereotypical view of how a Asian girls should be like. This led to the teachers holding a negative image about them, holding a negative perception about them. This negative view of the girls and the placement in bottom sets convinced teachers that they were low achievers. So, number one, the negative view. Let me pick up another color. So, number one, the negative view. Where did it go? Number one, the negative view. No, I need to change this. So, number one, the negative view of the girls. Number two, the placement in bottom sets. This convinced teachers that these girls were low achievers. This, my dear, and this. This has turned out to be pretty colorful. However, so as a result, the girls gradually stopped taking part in learning, right? So, see, like we've discussed this in earlier lessons, the perception held by teachers could actually uh, have an impact, could be a positive impact and could be a negative impact too. Now, as a result, the girls gradually stopped taking part in learning. As one girl puts it, I'm not interested. I don't want to do anything. I just like coming to school to meet my friends, which again would have translated in that particular group not performing very well in education. So five researchers, five theories that I said that I had mentioned at the beginning that we'd be discussing today. We initially spoke about the study conducted by Gilban and Udall in the early 2000s, followed by the study conducted by Tony Seville in the year 1997. Number three, followed by the research that was conducted by Heidi Safia Mirza in 1992, followed by the study conducted by Connolly in 1998. And towards the end, we spoke about the study conducted by Farzana Shane in the year 2010. All of these five theories, we use them to discuss the extent to which racism within schools affects the educational performance of pupils. Racism within schools affects the educational performance of pupils. Now, let's take this ahead and link this racism with setting. Remember, ability groups. There were four different ability groups. If you do not remember this, go back, read through that. Four different ability groups: setting, banding, streaming, and mixed ability teaching. Now, discrimination linked to settings in school. Critiques of setting and we did discuss this earlier, that setting didn't really have, apparently the idea behind setting was to identify low achieving students and to put them all together and to help them. But like I said, apparently, but it did not really turn out to the way it was expected to turn out. So critiques of setting in British context argue that the students allocated to lower sets or streams tend to be from the working class and or minority ethnic groups. Like I said, apparently the idea was that it was apparently that the idea was that these ability groups would help teachers and the education system identify these low performers, put them all together and help them. But eventually it was realized that these lower sets had a monopoly for working class pupils and pupils from the ethnic minority origin. So this can prevent them from obtaining the knowledge required for high grades and examination. By contrast, a disproportionate number of white middle class students are placed in the upper set. A disproportionate number of white middle class students are placed in the upper set. Ability groups discriminate in favor of the white middle class and against students from the working class and minority ethnic background. So, in a nutshell, individuals from the ethnic minority backgrounds, they ended up being placed more in lower sets. Individuals from the working class, again, they ended up being placed in lower sets. However, individuals from the white middle class origin, they held monopoly when it came to higher sets. Now, this is when we talk about Britain. Let's have a look at what happens in the US. Uh, yeah. So in practice, before that, rather, in practice, perceptions of behavior have been used as a basis for allocating students to ability groups. For example, there's evidence that Black Caribbean heritage students have been placed in examination sets below the measured ability because of their behavior, because the perception held again, because the behavior was seen as unsuitable for higher sets, according to Gilban and Udall. Like I said, after discussing what happens in the Britain, let's move on and talk about what these ability groups are referred to in the US. And then let's see how this ability grouping has actually worked in the US. So many schools across the US, for example, have a system of tracking or grouping. Now, what we were referring to as ability groups or sets in the UK, we're referring to them as tracking in the US, based on students' perceived ability. Apparently, based on students' perceived ability. Critiques argue that in practice, tracking means that students are stratified in terms of their ethnicity and socioeconomic status. Don't you see a lot of similarity between what happens in the US and what happens in the UK? Like, according to Gilvan and Udall, the way this British education system is excluding individuals from the working class and excluding individuals from black from the black ethnic minority origin from getting into higher sets. So is the case when it comes to the US. In the US, individuals, it has been seen by many, the ones who criticize this tracking system, it has been seen that tracking means that students are stratified, or in words, uh, divided or put into groups, typified, categorized, classified. So students are stratified in terms of their ethnicity and socioeconomic status. Critiques also point out that in cases where schools have switched from tracking to mixed ability teaching. Now, see, if you're now for to be able to understand this, you all need to have an amazing understanding of uh, these different ability groups. I've been saying this over and over again. You do not know it. If you do not know it, go back, refer to the social to the part where we discuss the impact social class has on education attainment. You'd find this topic ability grouping there. Go there, read through it so that you understand this better. However, based on the assumption that you know the difference between sets, streams, bands. Critiques also point out that in cases where schools have switched from tracking to mixed ability teaching, the achievement gap between minority and white students have narrowed. So what we're talking about is if you get over with dividing students into ability groups and try teaching them all together, the gap between the performance of the white majority and individuals from the ethnic minority has actually shrunk, has actually narrowed, has actually lessened, which is a very good thing. So there shouldn't really be a difference between educational performance, especially on the basis of uh, especially on the basis of your ethnic origin. For the matter of fact, there shouldn't really be any difference in terms of education performance based on anything else but academics. Now, according to Mathis in 2013, there are some people. So let me repeat what I'm trying to explain you is it has been seen, or there's considerable amount of evidence that suggests that when schools switch from ability grouping to mixed ability grouping, when you categorizing students into different groups, to mixed ability grouping, where you're putting everyone together and then you're teaching them together, and the ones who you think require help, you give them extra help. Okay, so there's considerable amount of evidence that shows that when there's been a move from ability grouping to mixed ability teaching, it has actually narrowed the gap between education performance of the white majority and members of the ethnic minority. However, according to William Matthews, there are still individuals who oppose this. There are still individuals who'd be like, no, this mixed ability teaching should not be adopted, and we should be sticking, or the education system should be sticking to, or a particular school should be sticking to ability groups, or categorizing kids on the basis of their ability. So according to Mathis, opposition to the elimination of tracking in the US is linked to the desire to preserve privilege. Or in other words, if you think tracking or ability groups being changed into mixed ability group works, okay, and even in that case you still wanting to stick to ability grouping, that in other words means you are amongst the people who desire or who wish preserving the white privilege. आम जबान के अंदर अगर आपको लगता है कि अगर अगर आपको नजर आ रहा है कि अबिलिटी ग्रुप्स को ख़त्म करके हम जब मिक्स अबिलिटी ग्रुप्स की तरफ जा रहे हैं, तो उससे अ, बेहतरी आ रही है सिस्टम के अंदर। बेहतरी किस तरीके से आ रही है सिस्टम के अंदर? आपके पास जो डिफरेंस था इन टर्म्स ऑफ एजुकेशन अटेनमेंट बिटवीन द व्हाइट्स एंड द नॉन व्हाइट्स, वो कम होता जा रहा है। आपको ये अगर पता भी है कि एक सिस्टम में तब्दीली लाने से आपका सिस्टम बेहतर हो रहा है, तो भी आप चाह रहे हो कि वो जो पुराना सिस्टम था ऑफ एबिलिटी ग्रुपिंग दैट शुड बी स्टिक टू, इन दैट केस यू आर अमंग्स द वंस जो कि वाइट प्रिविलेज को फेवर करना चाह रहे हैं। यू आर अमंग्स द वंस हु आर एक्चुअली ट्राइंग टू बी रेसिस्ट, एंड डिस्पाइट ऑफ नोइंग दैट अ सिस्टम and despite of knowing that a system requires a change, if you're still someone who's opposing the change, or if you're someone who's against this change, that in other words means you're trying to preserve the privilege that white individuals have. So I think this might have helped you all. At least I hope and pray that it did. We were discussing all of this under the heading of ethnicity and educational attainment. Like I had initially mentioned right at the beginning, we'd be discussing this. We'd be discussing this under three different headings, uh, probably divided into two lessons. This is the first lesson where we discussed racism in schools. The second lesson would have cultural explanations and ethnicity, subcultures, and attainment both together. So yeah, that this is pretty much it for the day. Take good care of yourselves. Bye bye.